The scent of smoke still lingered in the bones of the earth. Ash drifted across the scorched fields like pale snow, settling on the cracked stone of what had once been a grand stronghold, the heart of the kingdom. Now only broken towers stood, jagged and blackened like the teeth of a slain beast. A blood-red dawn crept over the horizon, casting long shadows over the ruins, and there, amidst the rubble, stood Lucy Monroe, her cloak torn, her crown gone, but her back straight and her eyes sharp as ever. She had returned to reclaim what was lost. Chris stood beside her, one hand resting on the hilt of his great sword. Dirt streaked his face, his armor dented and crusted with old blood, yet his posture was relaxed, almost defiant. The fires of battle still danced in his eyes, but they softened when they turned to Lucy. They had survived the storm, just barely. Around them, a ragged assembly of banners flapped weakly in the breeze. What remained of the kingdom's houses had answered Lucy's call, though not out of loyalty. The nobles gathered at the base of the shattered citadel were wolves in silk, watching with narrowed eyes and masked intentions. The first to speak was Lord Varon, an aging man with a polished cane and a serpent's tongue. "You would have us believe this kingdom can be rebuilt," he said, voice as smooth as oil. "With what army, Lady Monroe? With what gold? We are vultures circling a corpse, nothing more." Chris took a half-step forward, but Lucy raised a hand, stopping him. "I don't need you to believe," she replied, voice low but steady. "I need you to choose between a future or more ashes." Silence followed. Tension hung in the air, coiled like a whip. Then a voice from the back, a young woman in rough leather armor, spoke up. "I fought with her at Dalen's Ridge. We were outnumbered 5-1. She didn't run. She didn't beg. She led. I'll follow that." More murmurs followed, a few nods, many scowls. They had not come to pledge loyalty. They had come to see what remained of the woman who once defied 3 kings and lived. Chris's voice cut the murmurs. "You all remember the fall, but I remember the fire before it. She gave you peace, and when war came, she bled while you counted coin. We're not here to beg for your swords. We're here to see if you still deserve your titles." That earned silence. Real silence. Lucy turned to face the gathered lords, her eyes sweeping over them with the cold clarity of command. "You think I came back for vengeance?" "I didn't. I came back because this land is broken. Not just the stones, but the soul of it. And if none of you have the stomach to fix it, step aside. I'll build it from the bones up." At that, a few nobles walked away, but more stayed. As twilight fell, a makeshift council was formed within the ruins. A long table salvaged from the fallen hall was dragged into what remained of the war chamber. Maps, aged and burned, were unrolled. Supply lines were redrawn. Alliances were bartered with guarded glances and whispered doubts. Later that night, Lucy stood alone on the old battlements, staring out over the dark fields. Chris joined her, his presence as familiar as her own breath. "They'll fight," he said. "Some will," she replied. "Others will try to use us." Chris nodded. "Let them try. We've been used before. We've survived worse." She looked up at him, tired but resolute. "We're not just surviving anymore, Chris. We're taking it back. All of it." Smiled then, small and dangerous. "Then let's give them something to believe in again." Behind them the wind shifted. Somewhere a bell rang, a call, distant but rising. In the heart of ruin, the embers of a kingdom began to stir. The fires of the old world still smoldered beneath the soil, and in the ruins of the shattered obsidian keep, Mirren stood motionless, her enormous silhouette cut through the morning fog like a tower of flesh and memory, her rose-toned skin now scarred by ash and steel. Beside her, Nora Halen leaned against a broken pillar, checking the pulse rifle she'd salvaged from the last assault. Her breath steamed in the cold wind. Scarlet Vein had barely slept. She sat on the edge of what used to be a grand council table, now split down the center, her sword balanced across her lap. The edge still dripped with blood, black, oily, and not entirely human. The silence was not peace, it was preparation. We need to move, Nora said, her voice like flint. They'll be back, and next time with something worse than sky crawlers. Mirren's glowing crimson eyes shifted to the horizon. Let them come. No, Scarlet interrupted. We're not defending anymore. They turned to her. Her voice had the calmness of someone who had made a decision that would not be reversed. We've been running, reacting, surviving. That ends today. We're going to take the fight to them, tear the roots of their empire from the stars. Mirren's eyes narrowed. You speak of building, Scarlet nodded, of reclaiming, but first, of war. She walked into the center of the fractured hall, her boots echoing against cracked stone. They tried to bury us under their thrones, their codes, their rewritten histories. But we are the anomaly. The rebellion they failed to extinguish, and with Mirren's might and your precision, Nora, we're not just an army. We're the extinction of their legacy. Nora crossed her arms, half smirking. Then, let's light the match. Outside, the atmosphere was thick with static, remnants of orbital bombardments still crackling in the clouds. Below the cliffs, legions of abandoned machines lay dormant, some twitching with dying sparks. Mirren descended the ridge first, her footfalls causing the earth to shudder. They entered the junk graveyard, where dead war machines rusted under alien vines. Scarlet approached a shattered monolith, the tomb of the celestial regents. She placed her hand on its black surface, carved with forgotten glyphs, and whispered, "You wrote us out of your prophecy, so we'll write a new one." Mirren clenched. Her fist. A crown forged in rebellion. Nora raised her rifle, and sharpened by vengeance. As they moved deeper into the metallic underworld, Scarlet discovered a hidden vault, a sanctum from before the first collapse. Inside, maps, old war codes, and a weapon humming with dormant energy. The echo blade. It pulsed in her hand like a heartbeat, recognizing her rage. When they emerged, the wind had changed direction. Mirren's skin shimmered faintly with arcane circuitry beneath her scars, and Nora's visor scanned the far mountain ranges where enemy strongholds pulsed red in the distance. Their crusade had begun, not just to survive, to conquer, to rise, to carve a throne from the ruins of an empire. That called them mistakes, and this time the stars would remember their names. The sky above Ashmark burned with an unnatural glow. What once was a proud fortress carved into the cliffs of the Illyrian highlands now stood surrounded, encircled by an army that stretched to the horizon like a living tide. The banners of Avad, 1,000 conquered kingdoms, snapped in the wind above the obsidian-armored legions of the sovereign Blight. And in the eye of this storm stood Mirren, cloaked not in fear, but in luminous defiance. Atop the battered southern wall, Sera gazed, out beyond the charred battlements. Her crimson cloak snapped around her like fire-seeking air. Next to her, John Varn adjusted the sight on his magnetic lance rifle. His knuckles were scraped raw, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights, but his spirit, unyielding. Ashmark wasn't just a city. It was the last flicker of resistance in a world steadily choking under the Blight's dominion. Beneath them, refugees huddled in tunnels carved deep into the rock, guarded by zealots and engineers alike, children cradled in steel arms, prayers stitched into circuit-laced robes. "They've brought the Black Choir," Sera said grimly, spotting the towering organ tanks moving into formation. The choir's weaponry didn't fire shells. It screamed. Notes so low they shattered bone, so high they cooked minds. They plan to end this quickly. "We won't let them," Johnny said. At that, the gates behind them burst open. Mirren entered the battlement with the force of a god descending. Her skin shimmered with a soft, alien iridescence, the color of dying starlight. Her crown, grown from her very bones, glowed dimly under the overcast sky, and yet it was her eyes that stole breath, eyes like twin suns on the verge of going. Supernova, "You've held them off longer than I expected," she said, her voice echoing like thunder beneath ice. John and Sera saluted her. "Ashmark still stands," John replied. "For now," she nodded. "But the storm breaks tonight, and we must decide, do we hold or do we burn this fortress with them in it?" Sera stepped forward. "The people, I'll get them out." John said quickly, "There's a mining tunnel beneath the north cliff face. We can evacuate the civilians, but we'll need to hold the wall." "You will," Mirren said, "because I'm going to tear their gods from the sky." She turned toward the battlefield. With a single motion, her voice carved through the gloom in a war cry that cracked stone. Across the cliffs, the remnants of their army stirred, flame-wielders, armor-forged titans, and oath-bound sharpshooters rising to their queen's call. Then it began. The black choir sang. The sound was incomprehensible, a distortion that made the air ripple. Buildings crumbled and soldiers fell screaming, but Mirren stood tall, her palm raised. A translucent barrier, woven from memory and ancient biocode, spread around the wall. The sound met it, hissed like fire on snow, and vanished. John led the evacuation below, navigating twisted corridors lit by flickering energy cells. Sera stayed above, directing artillery and issuing orders with the fury of a general reborn. Every second counted. Mirren leapt from the battlement, her body ignited in a spectral blaze midair as she descended into the battlefield like a falling star. Blight Titans turned to face her, launching volleys of dark matter missiles, but she was faster. Her claws extended, slicing through armor and machine with impossible grace. Blood and sparks danced. The enemy faltered. Confusion spread. From above, the skies suddenly lit with orange flame. The Blight's warships, hulking nightmares of machinery, began to descend. But Ashmark's ancient defense satellites, long thought dormant, blinked alive. Sera had reactivated them. They struck like lances of divine judgment, ripping the ships into pieces that painted the heavens in flame. By the time John re-emerged, onto the upper cliffs, breathless and bruised, the tide had turned. Ashmark was broken, but not fallen. Its people had escaped. The Blight's army lay in ruin. And in the heart of the burning fields, Mirren stood alone, blood running down her forearm, surrounded by silence. "She did it," John whispered. Sera joined him, grime across her brow. "She didn't just fight them, she reminded them what fear was." As the sun finally pierced the smoke, Mirren raised a single fist toward the heavens, not in victory, but in declaration. The age of hiding was over. The world would burn, and from its ashes, a new kingdom would rise, one forged not from conquest, but from rebellion. The horizon was ablaze with crimson light as the two monarchs stood before the gates of the Pyrethian citadel, a cursed fortress carved into the husk of an extinct volcano. Smoke coiled from fissures in the ground, and ash rained like snow over the charred remains of an ancient battlefield. This was the place the old gods had abandoned after a war too devastating to preserve, a ruin now whispered to be the throne of the long-dead Fire King. And yet within it, power still burned. Raven's cloak whipped in the sulphuric wind, his eyes scanning the blackened stone walls, eyes as sharp as a hawk's, framed by a deep scar that now seemed like a badge of royal destiny. Beside him, Virelia stood draped in armor that shimmered like obsidian glass, partly reforged from the bones of the drakes they'd slain on their journey. Her emerald hair, once a wild cascade of rebellion, was now braided with threads of gold. Wrapped like ivy over her shoulder, she radiated a dangerous beauty, her fingers twitching with both arcane anticipation and the memory of countless blades. Their army waited behind them, a mixed legion of rebels, shadow walkers, exile knights, and forgotten kin from the mountains and the marshes. Some wore broken armor, others bore no sigils, but all were bound by the same oath, to carve a kingdom in their image, no matter the bloodshed required. But the citadel was not empty. As they advanced, the gates of the fortress trembled. From within, A deep rumble echoed, a groaning sigh of something old awakening. The earth shivered as molten light spilled through ancient glyphs carved into the stone. Then came the shriek. A beast descended from the smoke, a behemoth forged in flame, its skin glowing like magma beneath cracked obsidian scales. The last fireborn sentinel left to guard the throne. Raven didn't hesitate. He summoned the void. Edge, the cursed blade now whispering in tongues only he could hear. Virelia reached for her glaive, whose edge flickered with stolen celestial fire. They leapt together, as if choreographed by fate. Steel clashed with scale, fire clashed with the darkness. In the heat and chaos, the two fought as one, Raven drawing the beast into blind fury, Virelia striking with deadly grace, her every move a poem of violence. Their synergy was no longer born of alliance, but of shared purpose, of two fractured souls reforging each other through war. The battle lasted until dusk. When the sentinel finally fell, its heart exploding in a wave of heat and blood, the citadel itself quieted. The light faded from the glyphs, the fortress bowed, and then came the silence, deep, sacred, full of knowing. They had passed the trial. Inside, the throne chamber, lit by flickering volcanic light, they stood before two massive seats, forged from blackened bones and iron, the throne of fire, and beside it, the throne of void. Neither of them spoke. They simply looked at one another, not as warlords, not as conquerors, but as sovereigns. Together they sat, and the citadel roared in approval. Their kingdom had begun, not inherited, not stolen, but built upon ruin, flame, and oath. From this throne, the world would remember their names, and soon it would tremble. The warships of the Crimson Tide pierced through the night like silent daggers, their crimson hulls glowing faintly under the ghostly shimmer of Altheron's second moon. Sera Quinn stood at the helm of the Orlight, her armor still scorched from the battle over the forge cliffs. Around her, the shattered remnants of her growing force limped forward, scarred but alive. Beyond the horizon lay the sea of broken wills, a vast corrupted ocean where once 1,000 kingdoms had drowned, under the tyranny of the old gods. Now it stood between Sera and the Black Citadel, where her enemies regrouped and where the dark truth behind the war waited. John Varn approached quietly. The scar across his cheek, earned in the firefields of Balmareth, had reopened slightly. His black cloak fluttered in the high wind as he leaned beside her. "You sure about this?" he asked, voice low. "No one crosses the sea, not even the old warlords." She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the distant glimmers, twisting, lights like souls dancing atop the water. "They say the ocean remembers," she finally said. "If that's true, it'll remember what the old world did to us, and it'll let us pass." The ships groaned as they reached the boundary. The sea wasn't made of water. It was a liquid mirror, black and depthless, reflecting not just their image, but their fears. Each warrior who looked down into it saw fragments of their worst regrets. Lovers lost, kingdoms burned, oaths broken, dozens of soldiers turned back. A few leapt overboard, driven mad by the visions, but Sera stood firm, her thoughts clear. She held tightly to the shard of the oracle flame at her side, the very relic that had first shown her this path. Its heat grounded her, and John, loyal to the end, stayed at her back. The deeper they sailed, the more the sea pushed back. The waters formed phantom arms, reaching for the hulls, whispering in a language older than memory. Then came the Leviathans, ancient creatures corrupted by time and hatred. Towering fins sliced through the black mirror. One ship was torn in. Half in an instant, its screams drowned beneath an impossible silence. Sera leapt into battle on the deck, her blade glowing white with the fury of the oracle's fire. John followed, pistols crackling with violet runes. They fought side by side, back to back, slicing through tendrils and illusion alike. But the sea was not merely physical. It tested resolve. Sera, mid-battle, was suddenly pulled into a vision. One. So real, it nearly broke her. She stood in her childhood home, her father alive, her people safe. The war had never happened. Peace reigned. And a soft voice whispered, "Stay here. This is what you truly want." But she turned away, because it was not real, and her people, truly, were not safe. When she snapped back to the deck, the Orelite was the last ship still standing. John had taken a deep cut to his side, but he grinned like a lunatic. "You beat the sea," he coughed. "Now it fears you." Behind them, the black waters rippled and parted. A path emerged, paved with obsidian and veins of silver, leading toward the far coast, where the black citadel rose like a dagger stabbed into the sky. The sea of broken wills had tested them and accepted their wrath. And now the real war could begin. The battlefield was no longer a place of strategy or glory. It had become a crucible of wrath. Sera Quinn stood atop the shattered remains of a bronze war machine, her body scorched with soot, her armor fractured, but her will unbroken. Blood, some hers, most not, glistened down her blade as she gazed across the wasteland that had once been a valley of green. Now it was smoke and ruin clawed open by war. Beside her, John Varn staggered through the burning wreckage of a downed carrier, a plasma wound seared into his side. But his grip on the war banner never faltered. It was tattered, yes, but still standing, like them. The flag bore no sigil yet. They had not named their kingdom, not yet. The battle for the city of Caldrex, the last major fortress of the four old empire, had lasted 5 days and 5 blood-soaked nights. What had begun as a coordinated siege ended in chaos when the Emperor's elite Black Flame Guard unleashed forbidden bioweaponry that burned the sky and turned men to shrieking ash. Sera and John had not anticipated such darkness, but neither had they retreated. Their forces, the remnants of a rebellion born in the frozen mines of Valian, had dug into the enemy's weakness, its pride. While the Empire's generals celebrated a premature victory feast on the 4th night, Sera led a strike team into the inner wall systems. She disabled the power grid with her bare hands, crawling through electrified coils and slicing data nerves. With a stolen blade, she emerged bloodied but victorious. That was when the gates fell. John, from the southern ridge, had charged with their main army at dawn, not under the cover of darkness, but in full light. A challenge, a promise, a declaration of birth through fire. Now, in the aftermath, the enemy's banners burned. Screams had faded. The only sound was the crackle of flame and the hollow wind that whispered through the dead. Sera stepped down from the wreckage and joined John. "They'll say we raised Caldrex to build our kingdom," she said. John's voice was hoarse but steady. "Let them. A kingdom born in truth needs no myths." They moved through the charred remains of the capital square. Statues of former emperors lay toppled, their stone faces cracked and laughing. Sera approached the palace steps, those marbled veins of opulence, and placed her hand upon the door. It opened with a long groan, and what lay within was no longer a throne room, but a tomb of arrogance. The emperor was there, dead on his knees, his blade driven through his own heart. A final act of pride, Mom. He had refused surrender. Sera gazed down at him, then looked to John. "This is not our way." John nodded solemnly. "Then we change the way." They climbed the throne platform together and stood atop the dais. For a moment they said nothing. 2 rebels, 2 warlords, survivors, no longer fighting for scraps, but ready to create something beyond war, beyond vengeance. "I don't want to rule," John said softly. "I want to guide." Sera nodded. "Then we guide together." And so they turned from the throne and faced the people, soldiers, engineers, healers, refugees, all gathering below in silence, waiting to see what kind of rulers they had forged in the crucible of war. In that moment, the ashes of the old empire scattered into the wind, and a new era, unnamed but unstoppable, began. The dawn crept over the ruined spires of Caldrex like a pale promise, casting long shadows across the scarred earth. Sera Quinn stood on the balcony of the reclaimed palace, her crimson cloak fluttering in the chill morning breeze. The city below was stirring, war-weary faces emerging from shattered homes and makeshift camps, some hopeful, others wary. John Varn approached quietly, his steps measured despite the lingering pain from his wound. The cut along his side throbbed with each breath, but his eyes held steady, fixed on the crowd like a hawk scanning for threats. "The people wait for a sign," John said, voice low, almost reverent. "They want to know what we'll become." Sera's gaze remained distant. "We must be more than conquerors. We must be leaders who heal, or this kingdom will crumble before it's born." Behind them, the council chamber buzzed with tension. Old generals from the empire, rebel commanders, scholars, and merchants, all forced into uneasy alliance by the blood they'd spilled and the future they now shared. The fragile unity was a testament to the war's cost, too great to ignore, too recent to forget. Within that room, loyalty was a currency more valuable than gold. Sera and John entered, the murmurs quieting instantly. Eyes flicked between them, some burning with admiration, others clouded with doubt. It was a delicate balance. Trust earned in battle was not automatically extended to peace. "Today," Sera began, voice steady and commanding, "we build more than walls and armies. We build a future, one where no child will grow up fearing the sound of marching feet, one where strength is not measured by the sword, but by the courage to choose peace." A ripple of cautious applause followed, but John saw the flicker of resistance in the eyes of Marshal Kalen, the Empire's former warlord, now turned reluctant advisor. Kalen's face was a map of scars and suspicion. Later, in the quiet of the war room, John approached Kalen. "You doubt us?" Kalen's jaw tightened. "I doubt survival if we ignore the old ways. Peace is a luxury few can afford when enemies lurk beyond our borders." John met his gaze. "Then help us forge strength through unity, not fear." Their words hung between them like the smoke from the battlefield, thick, suffocating, yet necessary to clear. As days turned into weeks, Sera and John navigated the treacherous currents of politics and diplomacy. They forged alliances with neighboring clans, brokered trade deals to rebuild shattered economies, and restructured the military into a force pledged not to conquest but defense. But loyalty proved fickle. In the dead of night, whispers spread of conspiracies within their own ranks. Trusted commanders vanished, secret messages intercepted, and shadows moved where none should tread. The ghosts of the Empire's dark legacy threatened to unravel all they had built. Yet through every betrayal and setback, Sera's resolve hardened. Her red hair, once wild in battle, now framed a face etched with determination and quiet fire. John's steadfast presence remained her anchor, a reminder that leadership was not a solitary path, but a shared burden. One evening, standing atop the palace walls, watching the stars blink alive over a recovering city, Sera turned to John. "We may not have the loyalty of all," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "but we have each other, and that must be enough to light the way." John smiled, a rare softness touching his hardened features. "Together, we are unstoppable." The night embraced them, and with it, the promise that their kingdom, born in ashes and forged in blood, would rise no matter the cost. Hoylur, the fragile peace that Sera and John had fought so fiercely to build, now faced a threat more insidious than any blade or battle line. Whispers of unrest slithered through the palace corridors like a poison, rumors of a shadowed cult, remnants of the old empire's darkest secrets, moving unseen among their people. It began with subtle signs, missing supplies, strange symbols etched into the stone walls beneath the city. flickers of ghostly figures glimpsed in the alleys after dusk. No one spoke openly, but the tension was palpable, a living thing coiling tighter with each passing day. Sera sat in the council chamber, the glow of lanterns casting long shadows across the ancient tapestries. John stood beside her, the weight of command settling heavily on his broad shoulders. Before them, Marshal Kalen reported in grave tones. "We've intercepted coded messages," Kalen said, voice low. "They speak of the Veil, a clandestine faction bent on reclaiming the throne through chaos and fire." Sera's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. The Veil. A name whispered in fear during her youth, dismissed as myth. Yet here it was, manifest and deadly. "We cannot let them fracture what we have built," Sera declared. "If this cult is real, it thrives on secrecy. We must shine a light into the darkness." John stepped forward. "I'll lead the hunt. We'll root them out before they strike." But Sera placed a firm hand on his arm. "No, this requires more than brute force. We need to understand them, their motives, their methods. We must be as elusive as they are." The following nights were a blur of covert operations and silent reconnaissance. Scouts moved like ghosts, slipping through the city's veins, gathering fragments of truth. And then, beneath the moon's cold gaze, the veil lifted. Deep within the catacombs beneath Caldrex, Sera and John descended into darkness, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and forgotten sorrow. Torches flickered, casting flickering shadows that danced like specters along the labyrinth walls. They came upon a cavernous chamber where hooded figures chanted in a language older than the Empire itself. The leader, a figure cloaked in crimson, raised a dagger inscribed with ancient runes, poised to spill blood in a ritual of power. Sera's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "This ends now." The cultists turned, eyes gleaming with fanaticism and desperation. A battle erupted, steel clashing, sparks flying. But the fight was not just for survival. It was for the soul of the kingdom. Amid the chaos, John found himself face to face with the Crimson Leader. Their blades met in a storm of fury, each strike echoing the clash of wills. But it was John's steadfast heart that prevailed, driving the cult leader to his knees. As silence fell, Sera approached the fallen figure. "Your reign of shadows is over. The people will not be pawns to fear." The cult dispersed, broken and leaderless, but the scars they left lingered. The city's wounds were deeper than steel could cut. Back on the surface, as dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and blood, Sera and John stood side by side, their hands entwined, a silent vow amid the fragile light. "We've faced darkness together," Sera said softly, "and we will face whatever comes next." John's gaze held hers, fierce and unwavering. "For our kingdom, for our people, we will endure." The veil had been torn, but the true battle for the heart of their world was just beginning. The air hung heavy with the scent of smoke and ash, remnants of the veil's attack still smoldering across the outskirts of Caldrex. The once vibrant city bore the fresh wounds of betrayal, shattered buildings, scorched earth, and the hushed cries of those who had lost everything. Yet amid the ruins, a stubborn flame of resilience burned fiercely. Queen Sera stood atop the fortress walls, her red hair catching the dying light of the sun, glowing like embers against the darkening sky. Below her the people toiled, rebuilding, healing, determined not to be crushed beneath the weight of treachery. John Varn approached silently, his gaze tracing the devastation. "They struck at our heart," he said quietly, "but the spirit of this kingdom will not break." Sera's eyes met his, fierce and unwavering. "We've fought battles in the shadows, but now the threat wears a new face, one from within." Whispers of dissent had spread like wildfire among the nobles and commanders who once pledged loyalty. Old fears and ambitions resurfaced, fueled by the Veil's chaos. Some questioned Sera's rule, others sought to exploit the turmoil for their own gain. In the council chamber, tension crackled like static electricity. Trusted advisors exchanged wary glances, and accusations lingered unspoken beneath polite words. Marshal Kalen, scarred by war and distrust, voiced what many feared. "The kingdom is fracturing. We risk civil war if we don't act swiftly." Sera's voice was steel. "I will not let my people be torn apart by old grudges and new fears. We must unite, or fall divided." John leaned forward, hands clenched. "Then let them see strength. We will hold a gathering, not as rulers commanding subjects, but as leaders inviting allies. We need every voice to stand with us." The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of diplomacy and strategy. Envoys traveled across Caldrex carrying messages of unity and hope, but shadows lingered, secret meetings in dimly lit chambers. Veiled threats and veiled smiles betrayed the fragile peace. One night, under a crescent moon, a clandestine meeting unfolded in the palace's hidden wing. Sera, John, and a handful of loyalists confronted the whispered conspirators. The air was thick with tension, words sharp as knives. "You seek to undermine the crown," Sera declared, eyes blazing. "Know this: I will protect this kingdom with my life." A nobleman stepped forward, face pale but resolute. "Your reign ignores the will of many. We demand change." John's hand rested lightly on his sword's hilt. Change comes through dialogue, not rebellion. The confrontation ended without bloodshed, but the message was clear. The crown was fractured. As dawn broke, Sera stood once more on the balcony, the weight of leadership pressing upon her shoulders. John joined her, their hands finding each other in quiet solidarity. "We've weathered storms before," she whispered, "but this one threatens to tear us apart." John nodded, voice steady. "Then we must be the storm that clears the skies." Together they faced the uncertain future, rulers not only of land and people, but of hope and defiance. The fractured crown bore scars, but beneath it beat the heart of a kingdom determined to rise. The air hung heavy with the scent of smoke and ash, remnants of the Veil's attack still smoldering across the outskirts of Caldrex. The once vibrant city bore the fresh wounds of betrayal, shattered buildings, scorched earth, and the hushed cries of those who had lost everything. Yet amid the ruins, a stubborn flame of resilience burned fiercely. Queen Sera stood atop the fortress walls, her red hair catching the dying light of the sun, glowing like embers against the darkening sky. Below her, the people toiled, rebuilding, healing, determined not to be crushed beneath the weight of treachery. John Barn approached silently, his gaze tracing the devastation. "They struck at our heart," he said quietly, "but the spirit of this kingdom will not break." Sera's eyes met his, fierce and unwavering. "We've fought battles in the shadows, but now the threat wears a new face, one from within." Whispers of dissent had spread like wildfire among the nobles and commanders who once pledged loyalty. Old fears and ambitions resurfaced, fueled by the Veil's chaos. Some questioned Sera's rule, others sought to exploit the turmoil for their own gain. In the council chamber, tension crackled like static electricity. Trusted advisors exchanged wary glances, and accusations lingered unspoken beneath polite words. Marshal Kalen, scarred by war and distrust, voiced what many feared. "The kingdom is fracturing. We risk civil war if we don't act swiftly." Sera's voice was steel. "I will not let my people be torn apart by old grudges and new fears. We must unite, or fall divided." John leaned forward, hands clenched. "Then let them see strength. We will hold a gathering, not as rulers commanding subjects, but as leaders inviting allies. We need every voice to stand with us." The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of diplomacy and strategy. Envoys traveled across Caldrex carrying messages of unity and hope, but shadows lingered, secret meetings in dimly lit chambers, veiled threats and veiled smiles betrayed the fragile peace. One night, under a crescent moon, a clandestine meeting unfolded in the palace's hidden wing. Sera, John, and a handful of loyalists confronted the whispered conspirators. The air was thick with tension, words sharp as knives. "You seek to undermine the crown," Sera declared, eyes blazing. "Know this. I will protect this kingdom with my life." A nobleman stepped forward, face pale but resolute. "Your reign ignores the will of many. We demand change." John's hand rested lightly on his sword's hilt. Change comes through dialogue, not rebellion. The confrontation ended without bloodshed, but the message was clear. The crown was fractured. As dawn broke, Sera stood once more on the balcony, the weight of leadership pressing upon her shoulders. John joined her, their hands finding each other in quiet solidarity. "We've weathered storms before," she whispered, "but this one threatens to tear us apart." John nodded, voice steady. "Then we must be the storm that clears the skies." Together they faced the uncertain future, rulers not only of land and people, but of hope and defiance. The fractured crown bore scars, but beneath it beat the heart of a kingdom determined to rise.